Opening levels are very important in video games. They help to set the tone, teach new players key abilities they need to not fail in the game, and also showcase what will be in the game enough to keep players hooked. So no pressure at all then. For Doom, the task of creating an opening level is even more daunting, considering that Hangar, the first level many people experienced in Doom, is held up as one of the most iconic and important video game levels of all time. I wanted to take a look at how the series has evolved its opening levels, what changes are made in both execution and difficulty as the years have passed. For this, I figured it would be fun to dive in and play through the official first levels in all the retail Doom experiences. I'll be exploring what they do, where I think they fall short, and try to understand how they try to foreshadow the games that follow. For this video, I'll be looking across the Ultimate Doom's 4 episodes: Doom 2, TNT, Plutonia, Master Levels, No Rest for the Living, and Legacy of Rust. Note that in Rust's case, I'll only be looking at the first level, Scargate, as I feel that the second episode's level doesn't quite fit into the brief that I'm trying to cover here. With that out of the way, let's dive in. When you really think about it, how many people have looked at this room over the years? It's definitely in the millions. And when you consider that this level had to walk so that every other level in Doom history could run, it's kind of crazy just how good it actually ends up being. And yes, it is that level of good in my opinion. The fact is that this area is quite fun to explore. There's dangers here obviously if you're playing on the higher difficulties like I am here, but if you're playing on the easier difficulties, as many new players will probably do, this area is basically safe. It's a nice zone where the player can learn about going up steps, down steps, falling off ledges, and basically learning the ropes of the game. Now of course if you played this on shareware version, that switch is not there, and that door does not open up. That was added in a future update. But the fact that you can come to the window here, take a look outside, see the enemies across the way, it just kind of goes to show that this level is showcasing every new aspect of this that sets it apart from Wolfenstein 3D. The fact that the roofs are at different heights, the fact that there are sorts of little control panels around the outside of this room, the lighting is different, and rooms are not square and 90 degrees anymore. This level is showcasing that this is not Wolfenstein 3D, this is a completely different beast. And introducing the imp on top of that platform there, it kind of showcases how the developers wanted to sort of showcase that some enemies will not be able to hit you straight away. All of the enemies you face up to that point, they have pistols or shotguns, so they can, when they shoot, there's a good chance they're going to hit you. But with the imps, you have a chance to dodge. And then you can head outside. Now, a lot has been made over the years about Romero's U-shaped design with this level, and I think that it deserves praise here, because when you look outside, you see the armor in the toxic sludge, you want to grab the armor. And I think that that is good game design, letting the player kind of naturally feel their way through a level and explore. Players who are not super sort of aware of what's going on probably won't pick up on that. And the fact that this level also introduces this door texture as the exit sign, signposting that that is going to be how you'll find the exits, is pretty clever. This level does a great job of just kind of teaching the player and training them how to handle themselves in basic combat. And I also kind of like this here because you can see when you come around the corner, as you pass over that line dev, you can see that this lift drops down. Now only the observant players will spot this initially, but the thing is, players will probably try to figure out from this point, how do I get to that lift? If you try and walk over here, you can probably do it if you pick the right angle, but it's very, very difficult. And like I said, I feel that what Hangar does really, really well is it sets the player up and trains them on everything that classic Doom is, and I just think it does that immaculately. As you enter Deimos Anomoly, it feels very different to what Hangar was. You're no longer in a tech base, but you're in this giant sort of brick monolith, and there's two directions that you can take from the start. You can go through the teleporter, or you can stay here to fight the zombie men and head through that cross there. If a player kind of chooses to head this way, it gives them a sort of false choice, because inevitably they're going to have to go and grab the blue key. But the thing with this is that it allows you to kind of approach the level how you want. You can also see the skybox there, giving the player a tease that they're no longer where they were previously. I also think Deimos Anomoly is pretty cool in the sense that it feels a lot bigger at points. Like, so for example, this area here feels a lot more complex than what players would have seen in Hangar. You've got things in the toxic there, which if it drops down, you know, it's going to hurt the player. Now, obviously, by this point, you should be trained well enough that these things are not super challenging to the player, but there's a lot of little secrets and breadcrumbs that are placed before the player who is basically expected to explore the level. Now, as you saw, when we hit that switch, we got to see the teleporter there open up. And inevitably, we have to come here for the blue key anyway. And I kind of like that this is how some players will first experience the Cacodemon, because this room is dark, it's pretty claustrophobic. It's not big like the rest of the level. It kind of feels like it's in a sealed off and sort of forbidden place. And this episode's kind of giving you new toys to play with. So the Cacodemon, for example, and over in the corner, you'll see the plasma rifle. Now, obviously, it would be nice if that space was a bit more developed, but it serves its purpose, I think, in trying to train the player to expect the unexpected. What's also fun is if you walk on that bridge in the middle there, it actually drops down, but that one on the left-hand side there does not. I also kind of like how the player here is given the choice to begin this encounter with the pinkies. Now, if you've got weapons, you can shoot up at the pinkies and take them out long before they become a threat. But if you haven't got the plasma rifle, this encounter is actually pretty nasty because you've got a bunch of pinkies running towards you. I think that it's a very big sort of step up in difficulty for some players, because obviously if you end up here and you're not expecting this level of challenge, the last time you got a challenge like this was at the end of the first episode, and here you're getting it in the first outing, which I think is a nice inverse in difficulty. What I like about this level as well is that it keeps the concept that not all keys are essential, and if you go hunting and you find the red key, you're rewarded, whereas players who don't do that, they don't get to come inside and get the blue armor. Take out these enemies here. One thing I don't like so much about this level, and I think that it is a weakness compared to Hangar, it is kind of disjointed. This level makes heavy use of teleporters to move you around to different spaces, which I think kind of steals a tiny bit from the overall feeling that you're in a sort of unified space, because Hangar doesn't really do this. It kind of lets you explore the whole space, whereas here you're only really kind of teleporting into new little sections. But then again, I guess the idea is to try and disorientate the player, because you can go back, you can go through the level and explore. Much like in Hangar, you are not sort of blocked from going back and exploring the level if you feel that you've missed something, which I think is really, really cool. I do like Deimos Anomoly. I think it's a very, very solid outing for sure. Not as good as Hangar, but definitely a step up in difficulty. I do love the way that Inferno opens up, because the story blurb at the end of the Shores of Hell says that you've sort of climbed down into this chasm here. I like the idea that you raise up and you have all these enemies here who are looking to take you down. I also love the visual style of this opening area. This is by far the widest and sort of grandest in scale of all the opening areas that we've seen so far. And I think that what that does, it really sets Inferno apart from what we've seen so far. Because up to now it's been tech bases and tech bases being corrupted, whereas here we are just in hell. Now, it's easy to kind of look back and say, well, this isn't much of a keep, is it, for a level called Hell Keep? I think by 1993 standards, this just feels distinct and different enough that players who kind of show up here, they'll feel like they are getting a different kind of experience. Now, the problems I have with this level, and there are many of them, I feel that while the appearance of the level is very, very strong, I feel that some of the design choices really do kind of leave a lot to be desired. I feel that putting two Cacodemons behind that opening door on the Ultra Violence difficulty is a bit mean. And yeah, on lower difficulties, players won't have to deal with that. But I just think that it's a bit kind of awkward. And I understand that some people say, you know, you're supposed to do infighting and such, but I kind of don't feel most players are going to do that. I think kind of relying on sort of subtle mechanics like that really kind of doesn't work in these early Doom opening levels. And another room that I really dislike is this one. Remember in Deimos Anomoly how we had that pinky encounter and they dropped down and it was kind of like they charged us? It was very exciting. Well, this is kind of the opposite to that. It's a narrow room with no wiggle room for us to run past or to direct the pinkies. We just have to shoot them, and if you don't have enough ammo, well, tough for you. I also kind of think that this room with the imps at the end is a bit silly. In my opinion, I feel that by this point, players who haven't picked up the shotgun or picked up the shotgun shells, they're going to be in for a really, really rough time here. And I feel that this isn't really teaching the player anything new. I just think it's sort of shepherding the player down very linear spaces. I also kind of find it funny that this level gives you a rocket launcher, which would have been insanely useful at several points right at the end as you're about to exit. For me, it's just not good. I just don't like this one. I think this is by far the weakest of the introduction levels in Ultimate Doom. And also the fact that you can't go back through the level, so you can't go back to explore, not that there's anything to explore, really for me kind of seals the fact that, yeah, this one just doesn't do it for me. So technically, in the chronology of these opening levels, the next one we're going to take a look at is Doom 2's Entryway. So Entryway kind of has a bit of a hard task here. It has to kind of do what Hangar did, because this is the only first level that people can experience in Ultimate Doom. But it also kind of has to provide a challenge to returning players, because this has to set the tone for everything that follows. And unfortunately, Spicy Hot Take here, I don't think it quite achieves that across the board. I think it's a well-designed level. I think the fact that it's very hard to get lost and that there are optional areas like the door back here and the fact that you can collect these health bonuses, I think that all of that is great, and it kind of reintroduces a lot of the concepts that Hangar introduced. But the problem I have with Entryway, in my opinion, is that one, I think it's a bit too easy for the opening level of Doom 2. I feel that while yes, it is iconic, I don't think it's as iconic as Hangar, but from a design perspective, there's just less hazards for the player to encounter. There's no barrels to blow up, which there were plenty of in Hangar. There's no pain floors in this level, which there were two of in the original Doom's Hangar. And I also feel that even though you kind of get a lot more imps in this level, you're given more than enough space to kind of back away from them. And I like that this level has a lot of hidden spaces, so that experienced players who are paying attention and returning, they'll be like, well, I want to go outside. So how do I get outside? Well, if I go up this here, the back wall looks a bit different. Maybe it's a switch. So I do kind of like that. I also kind of like that the rocket launcher is hidden on a walk panel. And you can hear the door opening up there. I think that little touches like that help to elevate this slightly, but for me, I just find this opening level a lot less interesting than some of the ones we've already looked at and some of the ones we will be looking at. And this isn't me saying that this is a bad level. What this is me saying is that I don't think it does the job that Hangar did as well. I feel that as a first outing, it's visually pleasing to look at, and it definitely has a distinctive style with the brown walls, the green walls, and all the little touches that players probably have come to expect. But in my opinion, I feel that it's a bit too safe, a bit too simple, and for me, when people compare this to Hangar, I always kind of feel that this level doesn't quite come off on the same level, in my opinion. But then again, I am comparing it to one of the most iconic levels of all time. Releasing several months after Doom 2 as part of the Ultimate Doom retail release, I think Hell Beneath really kind of understands what it's trying to shoot for here. They wanted to give an incentive for people to come back and play the original Doom, but at the same time, this has the benefit of hindsight. So those Doom 2 levels that people were criticizing and critiquing, they had a chance to kind of show here that yes, we heard your feedback. Now, the thing with Hell Beneath for me will always be the fact that if you play this on Ultraviolence, there are no medkits in this level, there's no stim packs, and there's only a handful of health bonuses. And I find that a bit tragic. I think it kind of spoils this level a little bit because while I understand the desire to sort of create these fun encounters, this level relies on a lot of cheap tricks and teleportation traps to really challenge the player. So a lot of the problems I have with this level come down to the fact that the player is kind of at the mercy of those traps, and if anything goes wrong even slightly on this level, you may as well just restart because, like, for example, if that imp had really gotten the claws into me, that could have been a disaster. I do like the way that this level kind of has a lot of secrets and areas that the player can kind of look to get to if they need ammo, but I also think that the ammo count on this level is very carefully calibrated on the harder difficulties to make sure that the player isn't given too much ammo. And I think that it rides that thin line for me between being fun and being frustrating. With all that being said though, I do love the design of this level. I feel that it keeps things nice and compact. It's actually visually very pleasing to look at with the green bricks used pretty effectively in my opinion. And I also think that it has a very distinct charm, and I think that it does kind of telegraph what the player can expect from the rest of the episode. Now, in terms of difficulty, that's more debatable. I feel that Dieflesh Consume's difficulty spikes and valleys. It's very hard to say that this level is a true representation of what follows, because yes, in the next level, you know, it is very difficult, but then after that, things kind of lighten up a bit, even on the harder difficulties. But this level does have a sense of dread to it because of the lack of medkits on the higher difficulties. It does kind of have that feeling that you're fighting against these hordes of enemies. And like I said, it's not like I don't see the charm in this one. I don't see the kind of appeal for people who want that kind of harder experience. But as I've said in other videos, the PS1 version of this level actually it gets thrown into the kind of middle of the pile for Ultimate Doom. It has medkits and it's still a really good level. I'd actually argue a slightly better level because you're not constantly sort of being attacked from behind and then kind of wondering if you should restart. You can see the spectres who kind of come into the levels, they do pose a real challenge because the use of lighting kind of hides them pretty nicely. I feel that this is a very solid response to Hellkeep and Entryway in my opinion. I think this is actually slightly better than those two in terms of being an opening level. Yes, I have the critiques about the medkits and the health situation, but for me, I think that this is probably more where Doom 2 should have aimed in terms of its opening level with Entryway. And yeah, I know some people are going to say that's a bit controversial to say because Entryway is great for multiplayer and all that, but I'm talking more about as a single player experience. I think that this kind of difficulty is probably something that Doom 2 should have aspired for more out the gate. But this level is less about teaching new players how to play the game and more about testing players who are returning. And I think that's important to kind of consider when considering this against Entryway and Hangar. Because ultimately, a lot of people who come to this probably have already played the previous 3 episodes, more than likely have played Doom 2 as well. But I do like the design of this one. I do think that overall, this is a fun level, and had it not been handicapped by the medkit situation, I do think I would have a much higher opinion of it. But I do think it's a very solid sort of introduction to Dieflesh Consumed. The thing is, I think attack is actually a pretty decent level. I'm pretty convinced if they dropped this into the middle of Doom 2 and said have at it, I'm pretty confident a lot of people would have said this was a fairly good level in Doom 2, to be honest. I like that the opening here gives you several directions to head in. You can head left and head into a very crowded room. You can head up this way and grab yourself a super shotgun. And you can also use the doors there to head out to the side and take on the pinkies that wait for you out on the wings. It also helps that this level overall has a pretty clear design philosophy. You can basically see that this central area is where a lot of the action takes place. There's a pain elemental there. That's a bit of an interesting spike if players are not careful, because obviously this area can flood with lost souls. But there's also a bunch of specters, there's some shotgunners, zombie men hanging around here. And as you head towards the red key, you'll also bump into some other mid-tier enemies. You also have to remember that the context for the master levels is that they're supposed to be an expansion pack that challenged Doom 2 players who found Doom 2 a bit too easy. So of course this opening level has to sort of lay down the law in that regard, and I think it does a very, very standout job of that. You can see here there's a Hell Knight wandering around. You got to be really careful for the chain gunners as well, because if you're not paying too much attention, they can really get behind you and do some damage. There is a plasma rifle here, and you can help yourself out by taking out this Mancubus early. If you don't take him out, when you come through the teleporter just to the right there, later on, you will have a bit of a nasty time. We'll head inside this room here. This room is filled with all kinds of different enemies. There's different triggers that you can hit. It is a pretty nasty room if you're not paying too much attention. Again though, at this point, I assume that they must realise that anyone who's playing the master levels has probably already played Doom 2, so they have that sort of skill level to work with, and I think that that's why it's okay that this is actually a bit more of a challenge. I also feel that they're a bit more devious here with the traps that they kind of lay for the player. When you kind of head inside here, you'll not only get ambushed by some lost souls who are floating around, but you'll also get attacked by some chain gunners and imps who are in the walls. Oh, and yeah. Excellent. I will say I do find the texture work in this one a bit bland. There is a lot of brown going on here, although to be fair, that was kind of Doom 2's signature look in the base level, so you can't really complain too much. If you head down here, you can actually head into the red key area by coming in through those gates there. If you really just want to sort of get in and get out, that's probably the best way to do it. I do kind of like that open approach. It gives this level a slightly more strategic outlook. Players can approach it in several different ways, and I think that's a really neat offering. Things get a bit more linear as we head through the coloured doors here. And there's another pain elemental that I'm going to get rid of, because if we don't get rid of it, it's probably just going to cause me problems. I think this is also a good time to get the rocket launcher, because we're going to be heading down to the ground level in a second, and there's a bunch of enemies down there who are not going to be afraid to take me on. If all of the master levels were at this quality, then I'd probably play them a lot more, because this level for me, very, very fun. It's a very welcome introduction, and unfortunately, I don't think it sets the tone too well for what follows, because unfortunately, when you have so many different creators contributing so many different levels at various quality levels, unfortunately, it's very hard to kind of set the tone for that. But if all the levels were at this level of quality, master levels would definitely be higher up my Doom replay list. I kind of like how they tried to make use of the Doom 2 trees there to try and create an outdoor area. Kind of like this portal setup here as well. There's a blue armor behind that there. So this is the room where we killed the Mancubus earlier on through the window. If you don't kill the Mancubus, there's a good chance it'll be waiting for you and will attack you as you come through the teleporter. But yeah, attack's probably in my top 2 master levels. I think it does the job perfectly, and having played this many times on the PlayStation 1 version, it's probably one of the few master levels that I actually kind of look forward to experiencing. And I think as an opening level, like I said, if this was in the main body of Doom 2 levels, I feel like people wouldn't complain, because I think that it's actually in the top half of those levels. So, good level, this one. I'm just going to say it up front, I think this level is better than Entryway, and I've always felt that this level, the first level of TNT system control, I think it's just more fun. I think it's got a lot more interesting ideas. I think it executes ideas in a more fun way for the player, and I know that's going to sound controversial because Entryway gives you the chainsaw and you can use that to rev through the enemies, but I just feel that there's a lot more interesting stuff that goes on in this level, and there's a bit more of a sort of escalation in the challenge, because I feel one of Entryway's biggest problems is that you can run through it in about 10-15 seconds if you figure out what you're doing quickly enough. I feel with this one though, you don't really want to leave until you've killed all the enemies, because you're given the Berserk Pack right out the gate, and the Berserk Pack is just insanely fun to use. But there's also different spaces that you can explore. I feel that this room kind of achieves what that side room in Entryway does, just in a slightly more compact way. And this area here has less imps than the outside area in Entryway, but you still get a shotgun, and you know, you can use your fists to punch the imps, which is always fun. And you can also grab the armor there, although if you grab the blue armor, it's kind of pointless. But for me, I just kind of find this level a bit more fun. It kind of plays around with the player a bit more, and it kind of winks at the player. I don't like this. That's probably the major gripe I have against this level, is the fact that you have to walk up to that door in order to trigger the door to the outside area here. I think that's a weak design. But what I do like here is that it's setting traps for the player. And this can be a very nasty trap. If a new player doesn't know there's chain gunners in that room there, then they're going to get absolutely shredded from behind. And I also kind of like that they go for the false exits here. It kind of teaches the player immediately not to trust all these levels, because it's a shame really that they don't really follow up on that in future levels, because I think that that would be a fun kind of thread through TNT. But overall, I just kind of find this more exciting, more interesting, and more engaging to play through than Doom 2's offering. And I think that while it's not as good as Hangar, I definitely feel this is one of the stronger opening outings in any of these classic Doom experiences. For real, I do actually hold this one up pretty highly. One thing that really impresses me about Congo is that it really does set the stage for Plutonia as a whole. I think this is the perfect opening level for Plutonia. Even from the later, newer opening levels, this level encapsulates everything that Plutonia is going to be, everything that Plutonia is going to throw at the player. And I think that outside of Hangar, this is the level that you could most clearly associate with the place that it comes from. You couldn't put this, for example, at the start of Doom 2, because this doesn't feel like a Doom 2 level. This feels like a Plutonia level, and that's a compliment to the way that it's constructed. Even if I find aspects of this level frustrating, I like that there's an open design at the start here. I like that they just kind of assume you've played Doom, because if you're playing Plutonia and this is your first WOD, then you're in for a really rough time. I also like that this level kind of throws out the traditional sort of limits on enemies that are used in the opening levels, because I think it's pretty cool that you can see like Mancubus, you can see Archviles, Revenants, you'll see a Pain Elemental later on. it's really not afraid to kind of go, well, your expectations at this point are going to be shattered. Now, do I think fighting an arch-vile with a normal shotgun is fun? Not particularly, but it also, like I said, sets the stage for Plutonia, because this is Plutonia. You can go in any direction you want here. I like that if you wander into this space here, you'll see the blue key and wonder to yourself, how do I get that blue key? Because the answer isn't in this room. Unlike Hell Beneath earlier on, I feel that this really ties into the themes of the WoD that follows it, and I feel that as a sort of experience, when you're playing through this, you are getting the Plutonia experience condensed into an opening level. Whereas with like Hell Beneath, for example, I feel that while it's difficult and while it's a challenge, I don't think that that level of challenge is consistent across the episode that follows, and I think that that's one of the reasons why it kind of stands out a bit more than this level does, because the revenants you fight in here, you'll be doing a lot of this in the later levels. And fun fact, when I was a kid, I used to think that this level was just mean, like, because it has traps galore, and I'm not the biggest fan of traps in Doom. I feel that when you overuse traps, you're kind of punishing the player for not sort of playing beforehand and experiencing a level. Like, for example, that used to get me when I was a kid, because I'd always forget about those chain gunners. Thematically, though, it's very confusing what this is supposed to be. Is this supposed to be like a USC base? Is this like the storage room for the base? Has it been corrupted by sort of nature? Is that what we're looking at here? It's a bit difficult to kind of tell what it is we're supposed to be looking at, and I think that kind of feeds into one of my bigger critiques of Plutonia, that a lot of these levels don't really tell as good a story as levels in TNT do, for example, or levels in Doom 2, which have more consistent themings. I also like that the Mancubus here, even though they're over there, they're just far enough away that they're not too much of a pain for the player to deal with. The game's not putting you right up front with them, which it could have done. It could have put them down in the bottom there, and that would have made things a lot more difficult, I think. I think, though, you can kind of tell from this that the way that this level's being designed and the way that it's being presented, I think that they kind of know there's a certain skill level that they're expecting players in this to be at, and obviously if you wander in here as a first-time Doom player, this is all going to be very, very difficult for you, because this doesn't really hold your hand like the previous levels we've kind of looked at have done. As mentioned as well, it's kind of difficult to get lost in this level, even though it's not the strictest of linear levels. I think that it's very easy to kind of find your way back onto the path that you're meant to go on, and it's kind of a testament to the thought that went into this level, that even though there's a lot of moving elements and there's a lot of rooms for the player to explore, I don't think many players will actually feel this is an unfair level to navigate. The number of times that I died as a kid coming into this room, by the way, just want to point out to you that this room used to infuriate me so much when the Mancubus would rise up or the chain gunners would get you from the side. Just have a look around here. I do like the sort of scale and the design of this level. It's a nice sort of raising stakes, and I do wish we could get onto that platform with the arch-vile, because there's a bunch of chain gun ammo there, and that would be really, really lovely to have. Got the blue key here. You can also head up top and get some health kits from the imps if that's what you really, really want to do. overall, I like Congo quite a bit. I don't know if I'd say it's one of my favourite opening levels, but I definitely think it's very, very good at what it does, and I think that it really sets the tone for Plutonia incredibly well. Probably a lot better than a lot of the other levels at the start of Doom episodes do. Staging area is an interesting one because Doom 64 doesn't really play by the same rules that the other classic Dooms do. However, it does have a lot of similarities. So for example, there is a Berserk pack at the start here. Take note of that little sort of lub pile there, it will become important later on. There is a secret in this level that I'll be talking about as we make our way through, but as I kind of move through the opening corridors here, it's very, very atmospheric, and obviously the coloured lighting and the music do a lot of the heavy lifting. I do like how you can see into later parts of a level through that gate there. This room is completely optional, but again, it has a different vibe to it than a lot of what we've seen in this video so far. And like I said, a lot of that's because of the presentation differences. It's one of the advantages that Doom 64 has in this situation. What I do find interesting though is that they give you the Berserk pack and the chainsaw in this level, both of which are pretty good because the chainsaw in Doom 64 is quite wonderful to use. Actually, it's actually a really good weapon against lower tier enemies. Like, it absolutely shreds through zombie men, shotgunners, and pinkies. So the interesting thing about this area here, and something that may catch some players off, is that the blue key actually changes depending on which difficulty you're playing on. If you're playing on the easiest difficulty, the blue key will just be right next to this switch here. It'll literally be right there. If you're playing on Ultraviolence, however, it's actually in this little chamber here. It's an interesting thing because in all of the official retail Doom releases, I can't think of an example where they actually move the key depending on the difficulty. But there is a different vibe to this base compared to what we've seen in the other Doom games so far. It feels a bit darker, feels a bit more sinister, and there's definitely a greater sense of loneliness. Now, I do actually like using this chainsaw, so mowing down these pinkies with it is actually not a chore at all. It's actually really, really fun. I also kind of like this space here. No idea why it's open to the elements, but it looks pretty, and not quite sure what the functional use of this would be, but it does kind of give a good, strong introduction to what Doom 64 is, because there's a lot of things in this level that kind of showcase the features and the unique aspects of this version of Doom. If we run over there, we can sort of head down or up. There's two different directions. But what I also kind of like is that it's not too difficult, this level, to get lost on. I've never quite understood why there needs to be like these Duke Nukem CCTV screens in Doom 64. That is one aspect that has always confused me. But I think that rooms like this kind of showcase what is expected of the player, because I would argue that this is a slightly higher difficulty threshold than we've seen in some of the opening levels. There's a lot of pinkies, and pinkies are quite tanky, in particular if you're not sort of aware of how to deal with them. Remember also, this was released onto Nintendo 64. There hadn't been a Doom game released before this. Now, if we were playing just normally, we'd just go through the exits here and move through to the next level. But the thing is, we're not playing normally. I want to showcase to you one of the other little hidden features of Doom 64. If you destroy all the barrels in this first level, you can actually go through to a secret exit. It breaks with Doom convention in that way, and I really, really think it's cool. But yeah, I actually really like this opening level. I think it's pretty cool, and I like the fact that it doesn't treat the player as a complete idiot, and it sort of has to do all the teaching for Doom 64, but it does it in a really fun and exciting way, in my opinion. One thing that the Earth base really has going for it is the fact that it had about 15 years of development within the Doom community to pull from. Now, that obviously gives this level a bit of an advantage, but I feel that the way that it kind of caters to both new players and to existing players is pretty unique. And you kind of discover this as you're playing through the level. I'm going to make my way through here. But one thing I really like is that within the first 20-25 seconds of this level, you see all three of the different coloured keys. So you see the yellow key out front, you see the blue key down there, and when we head around this corner here, you'll see the red key on a ledge to the left there. And what I really like is that that kind of clearly signposts where the player needs to be going. I also kind of like how this opening part is quite linear, so players are kind of funneled down this way, but as the level kind of opens up, as more areas become accessible, and as the player uncovers secrets, that linearity kind of fades away because the path through the level changes depending on how you choose to approach it. And one way that the levels in this expansion tend to do this is they kind of breadcrumb the player with little secrets that lead into bigger secrets. So initially here, we're just kind of wandering around this base area. You can see there's a switch there. If you hit it, you can open up this area and you can take out the spectres inside. It's just a little example of if you're paying close attention, you can be rewarded. I mean, unless you consider that the spectre encounter not a reward. So once you grab the red key, you can actually head through the red door there, but there's actually a secret here. It's pointless to come in here before getting the red key because the switch to open up the other secrets in here is actually where that pinky is on the other side of this little sort of lucky hole. As we head into the red door here, I'm going to take out the zombie men. But what I really like about this level is the fact that it tries to add in details to the outside area. So this could easily have just been a flat area with some grass on it, but no, they've tried to add some gradiency to it, and the super shotgun is kind of hanging over the courtyard there. It's just another one of those breadcrumbs that this sort of is encouraging the player to hunt around and find out. Of course, you know, we can't get inside here because we don't have the yellow key, but if you want to, you can take out the enemies beneath. The only problem, I think, with this level, in terms of it being an opening level, is that for some players who might stumble upon some of those other pathways, it does kind of raise the difficulty quite spectacularly, and you'll see what I mean as we make our way through the level. It's one of those situations where if a player kind of curiously starts poking around, they might end up in a situation where they get punished for being curious, and it can be a double-edged sword depending on the kind of player that's, you know, experiencing the game. I want to do this here, so you need to hit that switch, run around here, and then we head into the teleporter. Gonna take out the spectre there. But this level, even if you don't go into the secret area at the back end of a level, you do get rewarded with a lot of goodies if you're paying attention. So you can see here, for example, we've already got the chain gun, we've already got the shotgun. Fighting a Ratnatron, it's a bit of an escalation. I'd say it's nowhere near as bad as Plutonia. In Plutonia, I think that's probably the most intense of the opening levels in terms of enemy variety, at least up until all the enemies start spawning in a bit. But you can definitely see that the ethos here was to challenge the player, but to also make it so that the player doesn't feel over encumbered. If they don't want to deal with like lots of heavy enemies early on, they don't have to. They can just run to the exits, and if you wanted to, we could hit the exit right here. This could be the end of a level, but we're not going to do that. It's very complex level design. It's level design that you don't really see from this period. I think when this landed, a lot of people were genuinely surprised at this kind of attention to detail, because there's a lot of different things. For example, there's a switch behind that box there, but I'm not going to bother with that because we're not really fussing about that. But if you're paying attention, you can find your way into the secret areas of this map. And once you kind of make your way in this direction, the enemy variety sort of spikes up, because the developers of this and this level designer, they understand that if you get to this point, you're probably a seasoned Doom veteran because you've been paying attention to all the breadcrumbs that they've been placing. For the new players, the people that jumped into this without really thinking about what they were jumping into, there's a good chance that they will never ever reach this space because they're not looking for secrets. They're just looking to get to the end of a level as quickly as possible. It is also possible to get to this point with barely any ammo if you're not paying attention. It's one of those levels where the more cautious you are and the more you explore, the better things get for you as a player. But you can definitely see that even looking back on the previous levels, this level just feels like it's in a kind of different time period. The complexity, the level details, it makes it a bit unfair to compare this to those earlier levels, and that's one of the reasons why I'm not trying to do that as much, because I feel that ultimately this level would not be the level it is had those levels not come before. This kind of stands on the shoulders of those opening levels. But at the same time, I don't think there's anything wrong with saying that, you know, the experience here is pretty great. Now you can see with this encounter here, this is far beyond what we've experienced up to now. Maybe Plutonia kind of touched on this kind of level of difficulty, but this sees a whole invasion of enemies flooding the level, and the idea here is that if you really want to get the super shotgun, you have to deal with all of these enemies. And as I said earlier on, there is a sort of sense of non-linearity to all this, because you can go into a door that's pretty much on that back wall over there, and you'll get thrown straight into the big crowd of enemies. But if you're smart, if you pay attention, you can actually go back the way you came and use your yellow key that you've just acquired to sort of skip around a lot of those enemies. It's very thoughtful level design because it gives the player choices without sort of explicitly telling them you've got choices. So for example, if we come around here, this part of the level is actually very quiet. But if we head back to the starting area where we got the red key, there's a whole bunch of enemies through this door. And no, we're not going to go this way. Instead, we're going to deal with the pain elemental here. Now, of course, the pain elemental is a bit of an annoying enemy to deal with, especially when it's spewed that many lost souls. But the thing here is, it saves us having to fight the revenants, the imps, the spectres, the pinkies. There's a whole bunch of enemies in that other room that could take us out pretty easily if we get overwhelmed. And I think it's just easier to take out these guys here. We can run through the yellow door here, and you can see we are in a safe zone. And it means we can now grab that super shotgun. And because we've sort of taken our time and we've been smart about this, it means that we get to make full use of the super shotgun. But it's that kind of considered level design that comes from the decade plus of Doom 2 level development that happened within the community. And this level, in my opinion, is the end result of all that. I feel that this is a very loving tribute to the best aspects of what made some of these Doom levels work so well. But of course, this is way too complicated for the earlier Doom games. If you put this, for example, in E1, M1, can you imagine how complicated this would have been? I feel like the simplicity of those levels, like Hangar, for example, makes them more suited to the games that they're in. And I think that that's important to kind of consider when we talk about this level compared to those levels. I thought I was going to die then. You can kind of see the inspiration from those previous opening levels in this one. You've got the simplicity of Hangars, just get to the exit as quick as you can, and Entryway, and you can also see a bit of Plutonia in here, because Plutonia's opening level really challenged the player in a way that I think none of the other opening levels have done up to this point. And this makes that an optional extra, but it makes it an optional extra that really kind of stands out. And I think that's one of the things that really helps No Rest for the Living really stand out as a level set. I really like this opening level. I could talk for hours about the design choices, the way that its aesthetics work, but for me, all I'm going to say here is this is a really great level, and I think it really does a great job of setting up No Rest for the Living and standing out on its own, feeling like a unique level while also being inspired by the levels that came before. I am nowhere near as familiar with Scargate as I am with the other levels in this video, but one thing I can say is that this level really does understand that it's trying to introduce a lot of new concepts. It's trying to bring in a whole new view of classic Doom, and rather than kind of throwing that at the player as quickly as it can, it sort of slowly lets us play out. So for example, there's a lot of details in this area which kind of make this feel like a more lived-in space. So you can see the chairs, you can see the cards on the table in a bit, you can see the quarters for all of the workers here. That kind of thing would not have been really considered back in the day, or if it would, it wouldn't have been done to this level of finish. But I think what helps here is this is trying to set the mood for the episode that follows, because we won't be hanging around in this base or bases like this for too long. And if you've played Legacy of Rust, you know very well that you don't really spend too much time in these kind of bases, which is good because Legacy of Rust is its own beast. But what I really like here is that it takes its time to set things up, because this feels like a more sort of experience-driven episode. And what it's doing here is it's showing you that yes, this is classic Doom, but there's also going to be a twist, and that twist is going to change the core experience in a big way. But of course you get your secrets, of course you get to kind of peek into areas sooner than you would otherwise. Grab the chain gun. The level design in this level in particular, it's not overly complicated. It's not like it's a super open space. It feels very in keeping with some of the levels that we've already seen, and I think that's a good shout, because obviously there's a lot of changes that are coming the player's way, and introducing them into a familiar environment before completely changing things is a good shout. And obviously if you're paying attention, there is a lot of new items for the player to kind of get to experience. I do like these spaces like this, for example. There's lots of different directions that the player can sort of wander into, but really there's only one that actually will push the player forward. I love this room in particular. I feel that, you know, this room is here just to kind of build the lore of this being a lived-in space, and I do appreciate it. It's very Doom cute, but I think it works in the context of what this is trying to set up. And of course, when we grab the red key here, there's going to be some surprises. There's nothing too surprising up to this point in this level, and I think that that's by design. Like I said, I feel like the intention here was to sort of gently get the player back into the swing of classic Doom before then sort of pulling the rug from underneath them and showing them a whole bunch of new things that, you know, I suspect that they weren't ready for. But you can see we're already heading towards the exit here. If we head down this way, there's actually a little optional extra area here. There's no reason to really come down here, but I do like little spaces like this, because one of the things that original Doom levels tend to not have from back in the day is they don't really have these kind of spaces which are purely here to do a lot of world building. A lot of the spaces in classic Doom games are purely there for gameplay purposes and for the enjoyment of the player, which is fine, but it also means that a lot of the levels don't end up feeling like truly kind of lived in spaces. Whereas here, there's like spaces where people can sleep and all that stuff. So it kind of adds to the lore of this world, if you get what I mean. And when you come out here, you kind of get greeted by this. Now, the first time I saw this, I had no idea what this was. It was kind of surprising. It was kind of a bit, you know, shocking. I thought that that was the exit originally. So everything from this point, it kind of always feels like, oh, okay, so this is where the traditional Doom experience kind of steps aside. And of course, with the big strange thing in front of us, we also get to see the, well, the beta Lost Souls. But in terms of this being an opening level, I think it does a really solid job of launching players into this brand new Doom experience with all these cool features, with all these cool new weapons and enemies. It really kind of tells you this is not going to be your typical Doom experience, and I really dig that. If I was to put this in a ranking with the other levels, I would probably put this in near the top. I think this is definitely one of the stronger experiences you can have as an opening level, and I think that this it hits all of the aims that it really needs to.